Good evening and welcome to Neighborhood Conversations. Today is June 20th, 2019, and this is a tradition that we've been doing about 4 years or more. We have cards for questions, and if you think of a question, you can go back and write it down. We have staff to pick it up, but I got a handful of questions that should keep us busy for a while. I don't think we're talking about trees tonight, for those of you here who were last time, but we'll see what comes up. And these are in no order that I know of other than the order that staff gave them to me. So, so don't feel there's no bias that I know of. So, council, how about you guys have your microphones? Why don't you guys introduce yourselves to the audience?
This is also known as the microphone check. Hank Margerson, served in city council since late 2007, essentially. Got elected then, so in my 12th year.
Sure.
This is a good time for that, too, to check out the
Chip's going to turn it up for us, right?
Turn up the volume.
I can't hear this mic.
And
There
Mr.
you
Margerson is loud. Can you hear this one better?
Anyways, Hank Margerson, Redmond Council. That's better. Thank you, Chip. I will pass it on to my friend David.
Hi, I'm David Carson. I'm the council vice president.
Hi, Tonica Pavier, been on the council since 2017.
Angela Burney, council president.
Shirley Anderson, council member.
Steve Fields, council member. I see Education Hill people here. I'm just curious how many people from this neighborhood are here. This neighborhood.
Idlewood.
The Idlewood. Thank you. Thank you.
Hank Meyer, City Council. I apologize for being late, but I was checking out Idlewood Park to see what was going on, and I had a hole in my pocket here, and I lost my car keys. So this is an advertisement for tile.
Well, welcome and thank you for coming out tonight on a nice, almost summer night. So the first question is, what is the city council's plan to encourage more neighborhood associations? This is signed by Paige Norman. Mr. Fields. I think it's on.
Yes. Okay. I actually don't know the direct answer to that question. I don't know that the council does have a plan. But just to speak from my perspective and my position on it, I think that it would serve us as the city government to better communicate with all the residents and all the interests. I am very much in favor of a community neighborhood organizations. We have one in the city of Redmond. It's pretty much a work of heart by a single person who has some help, and I would like to see the city support and help organize the right amount of neighborhood organizations across our city. I think it's a benefit to what we all on the council, and I believe out of the mayor's office, are aspiring for, is to be in closer touch with you. I think it's a great way to do it, and I hope that the council actually does pick up and move forward with something.
Councilmember Myers.
Thank you. And actually, Paige is married. She's not single. But she does a wonderful job with the Education Hill Neighborhood Association. And it shows what can be done with some effort. Both Bellevue and Kirkland have formal neighborhood associations, and they're part of the government process. I think that would be a good idea. Our issue over the years has been finding people who would like to do that and defining specific areas. We have a specific area here. I mean, the city has defined some specific areas. It's just coordinating those with people who would like to provide some leadership there. It's a great communication tool, as are these neighborhood talks.
Mr. Carson.
So I think it's a great idea. I don't know that I certainly don't think we've done anything to explicitly encourage them. We certainly haven't done anything to discourage them either. I do think that it could be used, as Mr. Fields mentioned, as a really good tool for communicating kind of officially with different neighborhoods in Redmond. And yeah, I'm familiar with Bellevue's West Bellevue Council, So they have like citizen councils that basically bubble up issues within their neighborhoods to the city council. And Bellevue's of a size where that does make a lot of sense. And I think we're obviously getting to that point too. So I think that's a great idea. I don't, formalizing it, it's going to take a few bucks, but it's one of those things that we should look at for our next budget cycle and see if we can set aside some funds for that.
I also think it's an excellent idea. I'm just curious because I live on Education Hill, so we have Edna, we have the Education Hill, I think, neighborhood Facebook group, and I'm just curious if other neighborhoods like Grass Lawn or downtown have those. If, we do.
Idlewood does, a couple hands. Or
Okay, excellent. Because that would be helpful to me because I think, we need a broad representation, not just Education Hill. So if we had other groups.
I'll let Larry add something.
Oh,
The,
I'm sorry.
the quickest way to develop a neighborhood association is start with a neighborhood watch group, because the best thing we ever did in our neighborhood and the fastest way to get to know your other neighbors is to try and help avoid crime together, and that there's a lot of unintended consequences that come with that, and 99% of them are beneficial. I'm not really sure that we in the neighborhoods need the city council to help us organize. In fact, I think it's important the authorship of that come from the neighborhood to you first, and that way the skin in the game comes from us.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. I was just curious if there were already existing groups on social media that maybe I wasn't aware of. But no, that's a fantastic idea.
Mr. Fields.
So just quick follow-up to that, and I agree completely with what you said about the skin in the game needs to come from the neighborhoods. What I advocate is help facilitate it by, I sat with Paige and worked out a template and how many people are needed. So just having that information and making that available would make it easier. I also think that there should be some, as Councilmember Carson sort of indicated, that there should be some city money to help support it. But I also saw at the beginning of the Education Hill forming that neighborhood association where city staff was a hindrance when they came out to explain everything that people were just beginning to address. And I think that you're right about that. You want this organization to be grassroots, formed by people, and then make that connection. So, great point.
All right. Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. Seattle is working with the Musicians Union to help artists and musicians afford rising housing costs. What is Redmond doing to help support local artists and musicians? Mr. Carson.
Well, I'd say generally we're working on a lot of affordable housing across the board, so not just specifically for artists and musicians. I think it's important that you find room in your community where you can for those who aren't, don't make $1 million a year or don't make $100,000 a year. And I think we're doing a lot in that regard recently, and we plan to do a lot more. We have some opportunities that we know about, and I'm certain that there will be some opportunities we don't yet know about to do some more affordable housing in Redmond.
Mr. Murchison, and then we'll go Mr. Myers.
Thank you, and good question. So one thing the city has done is amend our permitting. In fact, we did this several years ago to allow smaller units, more artist loft type units. And there's one unit in downtown Redmond right now. It was built several years ago that is marketed to folks in the arts industry, if you will. Not just music, but all sorts of arts. And so that's something that we've already done. And I think we can do more of that as well in terms of attracting folks of creative nature, because I think your community needs a variety of folks. And this community is known for its technology and the creativity involved in technology, the arts involved in technology as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
So Ms. Burney has the microphone, and then she'll pass it down.
Thanks. just to add on, we do a lot of things in our city to help with affordable housing on all different income levels, not just artists, but anyone else who, and I like to think sometimes artists make a lot of money, but I know that a lot of time they don't. But we want to make sure that that everyone has an opportunity to live here. So we have different projects. Some projects go all the way down to like 30% of area median income. We have a lot of affordable housing in that area. We have a lot of affordable housing starting with 50% and up with our multifamily tax exemption that are starting to come online, as well as 80%. All of our projects in the city over 10 units, 10% of those units have to be at 80% area median income, and for people who don't make as much as a lot of other people do. So there are a lot of different projects going on, and we as the council have also developed our strategic plan, and part of that is developing some even more opportunities for workforce housing, for teachers, for firefighters, and people like that to be able to live in our city and stay in our city as well. So it's really a big regional problem. It's not just Redmond. And we're making sure that we do all we can as a city and as a region to make sure we're allowing people with varying different incomes to live within our city and around, so that we don't just have to have people who make a lot of money stay in our city. We can have a lot of different opportunities.
Mr. Myers.
Well, let me suggest, and following up on Mr. Margison's point, it was not the city of Redmond that went out and allowed smaller units. It was a developer, Robert Pantley, who came with the idea of creating small units with a common area, each floor having a common kitchen, and then also having an artist space. In one floor, it's ceramics. On one floor, it's artists' easels, and that sort of thing. It took several years to get it through, and I think the one thing we simply have not done is we have not had our regulations in compliance with creating affordable housing. It is incredibly expensive to bring a development to progress. It takes a number of years. The Affordable Housing Coalition suggests that 30% of the cost of housing in the east side and in Redmond is related to regulatory requirements. And I'm not talking about thicker walls or anything. I'm talking about the process that's going on. So if we want to reduce the price of housing, it's really great to reduce the cost of building housing.
So, Mr. Mayor, could you just repeat the question a little bit? I'm trying to figure out trying to remember how it was tied to artists specifically.
It says, Seattle is working with the Musicians Union to help artists and musicians afford rising housing costs. What is Redmond doing to help support local artists and musicians?
Okay, perfect. So I think we talk about this issue of affordable housing somewhat backwards. We talk about creating affordable housing. Affordable housing is a thing. What we're really trying to do is create affordable lives. Housing happens to be part of that. So I think we need to do the math first. We need to figure out exactly who we're talking about and how many, what is the demand and what is the level of income. I think Councilmember Bernie discussed that briefly. So I think that we actually need to understand the problem better. It is a regional problem, but there are things that we can do from a Redmond perspective and say, who are the people who need help? What kind of options would fit their needs? And what are the tools that we can put in place, whether they're creative ownership options, more ADUs, more micro homes. We need to understand what the demand is rather than sort of build it and they will come kind of concept. So that's my take on affordable housing. And the reason I asked for a repeat of the question, because yes, artists and are part of that people who need support or help. First responders, I happen to own a coffee shop, so I'm thinking about some of our employees. There are all kinds of people who would like to have help, but again, that help comes in different forms and shapes. So, thank you.
Did you have a follow-up question? I'm going to keep holding the mic.
So this is not directly about artists, but you mentioned you have a coffee shop with workers in it. It's related to that. Could you not just also tackle the issue from the other end? Like Seattle's minimum wage is $15. I come from a place where we laugh at that. It's ridiculously low. why can't you just pay your coffee workers more? $20, $25? Might be easier for them to afford the housing.
So your follow-up question is, do you want me to personally? N- and I think that's what I was saying, is that the help comes in all kinds of different forms and shapes. And until we understand the problem, just for the record, our employees average about $18 to $19 an hour. So, but that is part of it. That's absolutely part of it. Also, part of it is health care benefits. How do we leverage various organizations to provide, it's not the city's responsibility, but the city can advocate or help assist in finding those kinds of things. So I agree with you. The problem comes from all kinds of different directions, including a living wage.
Next question. You say that environmental sustainability is a priority, but every patch of green looks to be turning into tall apartment complexes. There are the city parks, but it's sad to see the trees fall for more people. At some point, we have to stop growing. Can we stop while there are still places to play, enough places to play? Mr. Carson.
Well, I would disagree with that, because if you look at downtown, with the premise, because there's actually 2 brand new open spaces in downtown Redmond that used to be buildings and parking lots, and gosh knows what kind of contaminants were in the workshop that the King County had next to the railway, where we now have the Redmond Central Connector. So I don't think that's an accurate assessment. People have their property rights that when they buy a piece of property, they have a certain expectations of what they can do with it. If it's zoned to be a certain thing, then that's what they can do with it. But for the city's part, I think we've gone and done and taken things out of what you would say is productive use from an economic standpoint, to something that is productive in terms of people's lives. So parks that they can utilize if they live downtown. So the idea is that we've made downtown denser by allowing, going up to 6 or 8 stories, but you also have to have places for people to recreate. So, and those are things that this, in the time I've been on the council, and starting even a little bit before, that those things were set up to be done. And so I think I understand the question, and I certainly empathize with the concern. At the same time, the city has done a lot to make downtown a livable area, and by adding green space. So,
Mr. Myers.
Thank you. Actually, the city is trying very hard to increase its cover, its tree canopy cover. But one of the things we can do is that we can make parks that we actually own and are not developed available to the public. And in fact, there is a series of parks that begins at Arthur Johnson Park, which is off of Union Hill Road and about 196th, and it goes up through Perigo Park and then through Conrad Olson Park, which is also undeveloped at this point, and then ends up through Jewel Park all the way to Farrell McWhirter Park. It's a great trail, it's just not complete, and the parks on the way are unavailable to a lot of people. We also have not developed Dudley Carter Park, which is a great little place, and right next to it is the Heron Rookery, which is just basically natural with a couple of paths through it. But I think if we want to make our greenery more available to people, we take the greenery that we have and make it available to people.
Councilmember Bernie. Oh.
Thank you. So one of the challenges we face being in the region we're in is that we have a lot of people who want to live here. And so what we have decided as a state is we have the Growth Management Act. So we have a boundary where people will have more dense housing, and then we have a boundary where there'll be more forested land. So that's one of the good things that we've done as a state, is create that opportunity to maintain our forest lands. The other thing that we do that I think is really important to keep in mind is when we put density into downtown Redmond and over Lake, what we're actually doing is reducing the impact on the overall climate, because we're creating an opportunity for people to live very close to mass transit, light rail, and bus service, and we take them out of their cars, which cause a lot of the challenges that we have with our environment. We also allow them to walk around and go to different stores and do things like that, versus living where I live out in Education Hill, where I could walk to things, but I really use my car quite a bit. But if I lived in downtown, if I lived in downtown Redmond, I would personally reduce my impact on the whole planet by living in that dense urban center, and then also having the opportunity to use the downtown park, which I use even though I live in Education Hill, but I love going down to downtown park and using those park spaces. I love the connector trail, which there's a lot of greenery on that. So it's kind of changing the balance of what we see as what we're doing to care for our environment in a few different ways. We're maintaining our tree canopy. In fact, our goal is to get it up to 40%, where it's just at 38% right now. It's just some of the trees are going to be in different locations than they once were. And so with that change, we can create the environment where we're saving our planet for the long term by creating that density and the opportunities for mass transit.
Mr. Fields.
So if whoever asked the question has those feelings, those are valid feelings, and I think actually a lot of people in Redmond feel that way. That we've grown to the point where our lives and the quality in our lives has started to diminish, and I think that is a legitimate concern. And I think that I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. It really requires planning. We need to think about how we build and how we grow, and we need to be much more careful and strategic. I think that public space, as Councilmember Meyer said, we have some opportunities for some great parks. My preference would have been to see our downtown area look more and feel like a hometown square with multiple public spaces where you could get a variety of places to go. So Redmond would be a destination. It wouldn't be, everyone has their own opinions. I'm just going to give you mine. It feels disjointed. It could be better connected. It could be better integrated with plenty of public space and plenty of facilitated recreation in our downtown urban center, as well as the emerging Overlake and Southeast Marymore. So I would make that a priority. I think that how you feel about where you live is important. To make an argument that density is a great thing that's true, but I was in a meeting with some City of Seattle political leaders once, and they said we're successful at creating density, but not successful at creating quality of life. And I looked at him and I said, you can't say that. If you don't do both, you're not successful. So I think that we need to plan better. We need to be more careful, more strategic, and that's what I'd like to see the direction of the city. Now, that being said, this year, Council is in fact working on a strategic plan that includes infrastructure as one of our main priorities, and I think that's where we get the potential for the parks that Mr. Myers is talking about, and the amenities that you deserve.
Councilmember Potier.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that I know that growth and change is hard. I've lived here since 2002. I was a downtown resident, and I used to walk everywhere, and now we have light rail coming in. We have way more restaurants than we ever did before, which I think is exciting. But my family grew, so we moved up to the hill, and now I have access to trails and parks and schools. And so I think we try really hard as a city to have neighborhoods that work for different people in different stages of life. I also believe that with our planning and our outreach, that we are ultimately responsible to you and make sure that we are thoughtfully growing, because the growth is coming. Even if we don't want it to be coming, it is coming. And so I think that we have tried with our comprehensive plan and strategic plans to be prepared for that growth, so that we have the infrastructure, we have the transportation, so that we're getting the light rail, which is, let me tell you, there were lots of cities that wanted that light rail before we got it. So I think showing that we do have a plan, that we embrace all the amazing people that have come here for different opportunities to live in our city and enjoy at the same time the parks and the trails that we have. So, thank you.
Councilmember Anderson.
So I'm not quite sure how the topic conversed all of those topics. I thought the direct question was, what is Redmond doing about sustainability and trees? So the answer to that question, as far as I'm aware, is we've, to acknowledge that, yes, we seem to be losing trees faster than we are putting back in is, I believe, correct in what we've acknowledged in the tree canopy plan that we adopted. Mr. Fields is correct. We have a plan, including a strategic plan, including environmental sustainability, and Ms. Burney actually asked us to increase in our most recent budget the amount of trees that we're planting in the upcoming budget, so that was great. So as council, we have the authority to ask for those kinds of things, so we look to you to help us understand what types of things we need to be doing up here on the dais or in the shooting range here. So the idea would be the other question, and that was a direct question I heard, and I think several council members addressed this, was can we stop growing? And the direct answer is no, because we are legislatively required to continue to accept growth, as I believe is the case. And then the other question, the last question, was, are we losing park space? And I'm not quite sure that answer is no either, but I do know that we are actively investing in our parks, and we have a park plan that we adopted within my short term on council. So we are proactively doing some of those things to enhance the environmental sustainability within the community, as well as to invest in our local neighborhood parks throughout the city. So.
Mr. Murchison.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. So there's always a push-pull when it comes to someone's property. Including the cities. I think back to about 14 years ago when the city was going to do a water treatment, if you will, or well treatment facility. The well itself is in Anderson Park, and if you haven't been to Anderson Park, go there. It's beautiful. I was on the Parks and Trails Commission at the time, and we heard about it, and we realized if we put this treatment in the park, we're going to lose almost a third of our park in terms of the usefulness, and we'll cut down a lot of those old growth fir trees that are really critical. And you know, the story was, well, if you do this, you'll be able to show pictures on the side of this building. But we said that's not what we want for that park. That's not the value of the park. The park's value is different. It's shade. On a hot day, I urge you, go to Anderson Park. It's always cooler there. There's a good breeze, and it's nice and shady, in a good way, shady. I would also say, so we lobbied council. Those of us who were on the Parks and Trails Commission lobbied council and convinced them to purchase a piece of property just up the road. It's a little extra expense, but in a sense, the council said, yes, we'll do that. And so those are the types of things that we're looking to do in order to preserve a valuable park space, which is limited. We also added Smith Woods, which is another North Redmond Park, which probably doesn't resonate with this group here, but it does with those folks who live in those new neighborhoods up there, who are also building their own individual personal parks, if you will, call them pocket parks, as well as adding the Central Connector and the downtown park within the last, say, 5 or 6 years. Those are wildly successful in terms of how well they've been accepted by our public. As for the other parts, I think the rest of the council has addressed that pretty well.
I forgot
Mr.
one thing,
Myers.
and that is, I don't know who asked the question, but if you're serious, Redmond has a Green Redmond program, which is operated through Forterra. I happen to be the forest steward for Meadow Park, and I'm out there 2 or 3 times a week, either hand watering the young trees or clearing up debris and litter. So it's a volunteer program. Go to redmond.gov and type in Green Redmond, and you will see the various projects that are being carried out. We clear invasives, we get rid of debris, we plant new trees, we increase the canopy cover. It's something that everybody here could do and would really be appreciated.
Mr. Carson.
Well, I just wanted to add one quick little thing about the way we grow has been a very conscious effort on the council's behalf, or on our, it's been a strategy that the council's adopted, where we have decided that in the urban centers, so Overlake and downtown Redmond, instead of allowing growth to happen in neighborhoods where you have a developer buy up 4 or 6 lots and put in a multifamily unit. We've said, no, that's not where we want to go. We want to see the growth where the infrastructure is, so light rail and bus service and other amenities where you can walk to them. And if you look at what Seattle's doing, they're basically doing all of the above. So they're allowing a developer to go in and buy 6, 8, 10 lots and take those older homes and scrape them and build multifamily developments. And that is what we've consciously chosen not to do. You'll see infill where you've got, let's say a house that's built on 2 acres. Sometimes those kinds of houses will be purchased and then subdivide the lot. But that's a different kind of animal. That's still a single-family development versus having a multifamily development come into a neighborhood that is mostly single-family or all single-family. So that's been a truly conscious decision by the council to do that instead of what Seattle has done, which is just kind of a melee. So,
Mr. Fields, and then we're going to move on to the next question.
So just one quick correction. Councilmember Anderson said we had a strategic plan. We're actually developing the strategic plan now. So it's not complete or ready. And the other thing is we did budget a sustainability position in our budget last year. We're looking to hire that person, and I think that will also help with what we're doing.
All right, next question. Why are I'm really not a follow-up. If it's a question, you don't have to yell. I'll be coming. If it's a follow-up question.
Our former mayor, Mary Ann Ives, was on a mission about 4 or 5 years ago to get the architectural look and feel be a little more homogeneous, more in kind of alignment with kind of just a beautiful Northwest place to be. And we've got a lot of these new buildings which are anything but that. And so is that part of the plan, is to kind of develop a way to kind of turn that, have some oversight on the way these developments are going to look, because that makes a big deal, different.
Ms. Anderson.
I did just hear about an opening on the design review board. Right? It's a volunteer position, so I believe that we are looking for some additional eyes and ears on that topic.
Well,
great.
I think maybe
you're hired.
Yes. Mr. Carson.
well, I was just going to say, so have you ever gone into an area and realized that all the buildings were built in the 60s? So if I remember the old Safeco buildings, as well as the actually not too far from here in Bellevue, which they're going to be redeveloping soon. But they all look dated because they were all the same kind of style. They were tilt up. They were, they had the striations going up the side. I mean, the kind of more industrial building I'm talking about. And I think one of the things that we on council have come to realize, because of a couple of missteps in downtown with apartments that actually looked way too much alike, they frankly, it looks bad. And the problem is we don't have the fortuity to see what will be built next to something if there's just an empty lot next door. So you don't get to see everything in situ where, and we don't get a plan what these things look like. The developer comes with the plan, and we, at the end of the day, we may have some say, but mostly it's a staff and design review board that gets to really talk about what they look like. And so I think it's hard, both from, if you look historically at some buildings, you're just like, oh my gosh, I can tell exactly when that was built. And it's not a good thing because they look terrible. I mean, they're just completely outdated. Having these different kinds of buildings, which we've seen now in downtown, I think has been helpful.
So we were taking about 15 minutes a question, and I've got at least 12 here. So I'm going to have council be a little briefer, and I'm going to be a little careful about calling on the audience. Like, you can lobby your council people afterwards. But Pam, I promise Pam a question.
Okay, my question is this, is that I've noticed that we have the density, and then now we also have a density of cars as a result of all the empty lots where they're going to put projects in have now become parking lots for the apartment buildings. And I think that there should be some more emphasis on the parking for what the apartments are putting in. They're like a half of a car or a car and a half, and all those extras are now formulating. You're going to see more and more pockets, like when the gas station is, now it's a parking lot of cars. Where the old auto parts store, it was completely filled with cars. So it's all the apartments are coming in. There's not enough cars for them, for their 2 or 3 people in the household, and they're just, because they're not being taxed or not being fined. I mean, eventually when those goes, where are the cars going to go?
Well, I'll briefly touch on that one. So the old gas station that you mentioned, it's been now fenced off, so you can't park there anymore. You can park around the edges, but you can't park in there anymore. And I would say it's a cleanup site. So how that gets developed is a guess. And let me finish, if you let me finish. And then the other part, that is actually a parking lot servicing those restaurants and whatnot that surround it. And those are folks who come from this neighborhood and my neighborhood into downtown and park there. It's not necessarily filled, as best I can tell, by folks who live in the downtown apartments. There are some spillovers, don't get me wrong, out of those apartments into adjacent lots and on the street, and they got to move their cars by a certain time. That's why we put the limited parking on our downtown streets, so we could actually get more circulation. But I think the challenge of cars in downtown are people like us who drive into downtown and park our cars, as opposed to the folks that live down there who walk out of their apartment and go to wherever they're going to go, restaurants and whatnot. So that's the difference that I would see. So thank you.
You can lobby your council person after the meeting, or I know you know their email. All right. Crosswalks. Why are crosswalks around schools and between bus stops not a priority? It goes on to say, living 2 blocks from Audubon Elementary is outside of the walkable area because the city will not put a crosswalk on Westlake Sammamish. The reason given is that a sidewalk is not built on both sides of the street. This makes it unsafe for elementary-age children to cross the street. It will make the news if a kid gets hit and the city was negligent. I agree with the last sentence. Ms. Burney.
I don't have all the answers to that question, but I will say that we're very aware of a lot of the challenges that, especially when you're talking about school children. We work with the school district when they change their bus routes. Sometimes there's not the infrastructure in place. Near where I live, they had to change some of the bus routes due to redistricting of the kids, and the school district had to put in a crosswalk and a crossing guard in one of the areas that it had never been there before. It's a really big challenge, and the city is very aware of that. One of the things that we're doing, if any of you have driven to Redmond High School, let's say in December on a lovely dark morning where the kids are wearing all black hoodie, you can't see them at 7 in the morning. It's been a huge concern of mine, having had kids that went to Redmond High. But just recently, in fact, we just got a briefing recently about a new kind of technology that will light up and illuminate people who are crossing at intersections like that. So there's a lot of technology that's catching up that we have the ability to use, but we have crosswalks throughout our city, and we make sure that we keep people safe. If there's a particular crosswalk that you're really concerned about and we don't know about it, I would highly recommend you letting us know. We have staff here, you can share with them, and we can find out exactly what's going on with that. But of our utmost importance is to make sure people are safe crossing the street. When we want to encourage people to walk, we need to make sure that they're walking in safe locations.
Mr. Margison.
I'll just add to that there's a, I think it's a project, but a redevelopment project somewhere near Audubon here. And the feedback we're getting from the person that owns the property, is representing the owner of the property, is they don't want to put a sidewalk in front of their house, which would be on the opposite side of the road, which would then enable us to put, which would enable us to put a crosswalk near that location. But the reason you don't put crosswalks where you don't have sidewalks on the other side is it creates an unsafe situation on the other side of the street for that individual, usually a school child, walking along that path, and it's too close to the road, and there's no evidence that they should be walking there. Most recently, up on Education Hill off of Redwood Road, There was a project multi-year, and it was a Safe Routes to School project that the city basically hired a contractor come in and essentially build a sidewalk over a ravine, which was difficult to do, and it took us a lot of time to bring it to fruition. So I would encourage us to look at those types of situations and create those safe routes to schools. There's money in out year's budget for that, but I think we need to include it in next year's budget, or the next time around we do a budget, we need to include that money, because there are ways for the city to create safe routes to schools, which would include building sidewalks and crosswalks for folks and keep it safe.
Mr. Fields.
I will just take this question back to question number 1 about neighborhood associations, and I think this is a great advantage and use of a neighborhood association to help the city identify where you think the risk areas are. And I think we've talked about, we all want our kids to be safe. How the best way to get there, we need to find that way. And I think one of those ways is to hear from the people in all of our city and be a nag on it, make sure it happens.
All right, I'll move on to the next question. I'm sorry, Judy, but you're going to get a chance to lobby your council person afterwards. We do have school impact fees, and we do have transportation impact fees. The school impact fees go to schools themselves, not so much the crosswalk, but the transportation impact fees can. Why are construction workers allowed to park at Overlake Transit Center? It's our only lot for transit. I think I'll hand this to Jill, and we'll work about enforcing.
They shouldn't be parking there.
They shouldn't be parking there, and we can get them enforced. I don't doubt they're parking there. I just.
That's not your responsibility.
Well,
It's the one at Overlake Village, right?
well,
Yes.
I got your card now, and we'll follow up on that. Next one, you gotta talk about growth again. A large number of 6-story apartment complexes are being built frequently. The rapid growth makes us concerned about overpopulation, scarce resources, and continued increase in property taxes. Do you have a limit on growth, or will Redmond eventually become urban sprawl? Word for word, that's what it says. Mr. Myers.
Thank you. And this issue comes up quite a bit because we, as single-family homeowners, and I am half a mile from here, and I know a lot of you, and I know that we do have a crosswalk on 180th, and there's not a sidewalk on both sides. But nonetheless, the point is, you're worried about your standard of living going into the town, and are those residents harming you in terms of your standard of living? Now, we do have an issue of parking downtown, as Mr. Margison said, and it's mainly people like us who want to go down and eat at Woodblock or something. The interesting thing about the apartment dwellers, and I think all of us at one stage in our life or another lived in apartments, probably fairly early in our lives. But the apartments today are unique because, first of all, the average number of cars per tenant is now around 1, and in fact, at the Vision 5, the art center, the Art Loft Center, 0.8 of a car per unit. And so what we're seeing is people are using fewer and fewer cars, and they may come here with 2 or 3 cars, move into an apartment, and over a period of time try to get rid of them. So I think that the growth of Redmond is being put in the proper place, and that you and I in our single-family neighborhoods will not have to be impacted by that. I think most of us here probably spend more time in Crossroads than we do in downtown Redmond. But I think that we have a good plan of concentrating the rentals in downtown and providing the amenities. If you've been along Cleveland Street on a nice evening, you see a lot of people are out there walking. So I think what we're seeing is kind of 2 different types of populations in terms of what their expectations are. And I think the plan we have has been working well.
Mr. Fields.
Just going to say real quickly, I'm not in agreement with my very good friend, Mr. Meyer, and sort of a little bit of what Mr. Margison said. I don't like the idea that we're creating a sort of an urban center in downtown that we're saying, hey, this is for high-rise apartment dwellers. I don't think we're really seeing that, but in a sense, that is what was being said. I think our urban center is for all of us, and I think we need to be more careful and do better in planning it so that it feels accessible, and that might be that we need to invest in a better local transportation system. But I definitely don't think that we want to create the feeling that stay in your neighborhood and enjoy your life and your barbecue, but please don't go downtown and increase our sales tax revenue.
Mr. Carson.
Well, I was just going to say, the one thing that I remember when I first came on city council was this kind of tenet that the council had at the time, and I think to a large extent we still agree with that, which is that no building shall, so basically go over the top of the treetops in downtown. And the idea is that, when you look across the valley, you should, basically the tallest building should be even with the tree line. And so it was kind of this kind of pushback against what Bellevue's done, which is, high rises that, make it a truly large city. And I think we've held to that. In Overlake, because we kind of share it with Bellevue, and it's on top of a ridge anyway, it's a little bit different, but it's kind of on the outskirts of Redmond, right near the border. But that's been kind of the tenet, is to make them just even with the treetops and not really go beyond that. And I think both the geology doesn't support buildings higher than that anyway in downtown Redmond, because it's called a liquefaction zone, which means if we have an earthquake, it's going to be kind of slishy. And I just think that it's a good tenet that we've had this whole time to top that out there.
Councilmember Anderson.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question back to you just to make sure that we're staying on the same question and Siri's talking to us today. So the question was, is there a limit to our growth? And my understanding of that interpretation-wise would be, is there a total population target that we are legislatively required to reach? And then that might help with clarification.
There is growth targets. The growth target for the 2040 plan, the regional plan, is, I want to say, either 75 or 79,000, and we're at 65 right now.
Great.
And for jobs, I think we're at 9095, and our job cap, if you will, is 119.
Cool. I think that was part of the meat of the question as well. So thank you.
Mr. Murchison.
Oh, shoot, now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, downtown is not liquefaction. What it is we have an aquifer from which we draw all of our, not all of our, about 40% of our drinking water. Those of us who live on that side of the river get a lot of our drinking water out of our wells. That aquifer supplies those wells. So that's why buildings can't go too high, because they'd have to go deep in order to anchor them in. So that's why downtown, you don't see huge, and you'll never see huge buildings in downtown Redmond. So I just want to correct.
Oh, yes, Ms. Potier.
Thank you. I understand the perspective of the person that wrote the question. I know that reasonable minds can disagree on what is aesthetically beautiful, but I can say that I embrace economic diversity in the city. I know that it's very expensive for people who are starting out to buy single-family homes, and so we have to have options, diverse housing types for all people, all stages of life, all income levels. And I did go to an affordable housing event today where I saw that Redmond actually has the highest inclusionary zoning affordable housing on the east side. And we were talking Mercer Island, Issaquah, Kirkland. So, these are options for people in our service industry, for, people who have just moved to the city that, the single family homes are out of reach. So while we might disagree about what's aesthetically beautiful, I do embrace the idea of having diversity and having these 10-minute communities where people can live, work, and play and have a less environmental impact, less traffic impact. So thank you.
Did you want to speak, Mr.
Well, I
President?
just want to,
I think you already spoke,
No,
though.
I did, but I wanted to.
Everyone else is saying you spoke.
No, yes, I did. I just wanted to correct something.
Okay.
So part of downtown Redmond is a liquefaction zone.
You guys can take it out in the parking lot.
I know, I'm just saying, but
That's the
it,
resident
yeah, anyway.
geotechnical.
All right. Here's one you'll fight about. What are Redmond's greatest struggles? What are Redmond's hopes and dreams?
Politics and taking over the world.
I didn't hear you. One more time.
Politics and taking over the world.
Our greatest struggle is politics, and our biggest hope is taking over the world?
That's right.
Okay.
Best little city on the east side.
Best little city on the east side. All right. Mr. Margison.
I think we're not that unique in that our biggest struggle is getting around. And because of affordability, that makes it more challenging. And so what we see are folks that want to buy a house have to move further out. Yet they work right up the road, and so they have to come into our community every day. The mayor mentioned, what do we have, 99,000 people who work in our community, about 65,000 who live in our community. So you do the math. And a lot of us who live in the city don't leave or don't work, right? Their children, people are retired, maybe work in the city. So you just do the math and you'll see why our roads are clogged at 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening. That's one thing. So that I think is our biggest struggle and our biggest challenges. And you heard it here tonight. Folks don't want more growth, but in order for us to get that balance of jobs and housing, we have to grow. And we have to grow in a way that is responsible at the same time as making sure that we have levels of affordability, diversity, et cetera. Our biggest, what was the second part of it? Our biggest,
what are
our
hopes
hopes and dreams. Our hopes and dreams. Well, I guess my hope and dream for the city is that we remain a leader in the region, because Redmond has had significant influence in this region. Inclusionary housing is one thing. The city of Seattle is looking at our inclusionary housing. They're looking at a suggestion that we have been making, and one of the things that I suggested we do around accessory dwelling units. They actually stole the idea from us, I think, and Kirkland's doing the same thing in terms of how to build better accessory dwelling units, make it a more easy process. I built one. I know it's not easy to do, and I want to make it easier for the next person that comes along to build an accessory dwelling unit. So that's my hope and dream.
Others? Oh, Mr. Myers.
Thank you. I've lived here 42 years, and I used to say there are two things about Redmond that have been true for 42 years. The second one of which is we have developed ourselves into a boutique village. And this has been done by mayor after mayor, council after council. Our zoning codes, our building codes keep getting more and more complex to the point that it only makes sense for people to build expensive housing or high-rise apartments or things where they can generate a lot of money per square foot. We're part of the problem, and I think we need to address that. My hope is the hope that I had when I raised my kids, and that is that they could come and stay and live in Redmond. And I have to say that my son had a very good job, or has a very good job, and he moved to Sammamish. And I said, why? And he said, because I can get 800 square feet more for the same amount of money as I can get in Redmond. My daughter, unfortunately, is the type of person we would love to have here. She is a special ed teacher. She's been nationally recognized. Her wife is a public defender. They got great kids, but they're simply priced out, and that's why they are still in Kalamazoo. So I have to say that part of the problem comes on us, and if we are going to solve some of this, particularly for future generations, so that our kids and our grandkids don't have to flee, then we're going to have to make some changes.
Councilmember Bernie.
I think we've covered a lot of the challenges, but for me, my hopes and dreams are that we continue to have forums like this and have ability for people to feel connected to the city of Redmond and to come to these things and feel like they can get their questions answered. They can ask their questions, and we can share all this amazing knowledge and talent that we have in our city with everyone that wants to live here. So for me, as long as we can keep doing things like this, even though we have a lot of challenges that we maybe disagree on, as Ms. Potier said, I think that with all of us trying to work together to solve some of these challenges, that we continue to be this amazing city.
Mr. Fields.
So I'm going to go with transportation as our biggest challenge in getting around the city. And we have a built environment. that is not really optimal, and we have had a lot of growth in recent years, creating a lot of challenges. What we haven't done, and what I think that we need to do, is really expand our creativity and innovation around a transportation system. We should not be shaming you out of your car, but we should be providing you options of how to move both within the city and within the region. So I think that's where our focus should be. That's where the solutions should be. I would actually agree with Councilmember Burney on what I think my hopes are. The only thing I would add to that is that you all have a lot of knowledge, and I would like to build that trust and have the city council and the mayor understand that this is a two-way street of knowledge. We have a very creative, very spirited community, and we should leverage every single one of your ideas into what we do.
It's a two-way street. It used to be a one-way couplet, so that's improvement, right? Okay,
Correct.
I'm going to move on to the next question. When are you going to expand Westlake Sammamish Parkway to 2 lanes south of 51st? Mr. Carson.
Well, I've been advocating for this, and it is actually on our plan to do it in the next 6 years. So actually in the next 5 years, because it was in the 6-year plan a year ago, a year and a half ago. So it is something that we will get just an amazing connection for bikes and pedestrians with that. And I have a really good friend who lives in Jamie's neighborhood, and he really doesn't want it. And I'm like, I don't think you understand. You can't get out at certain times of day, and this is going to allow twice as many cars to come at the same time, so your gaps are going to be bigger. So you'll be able to get out onto the parkway. And so this is one that I just live right before 51st. So, and it's just a nightmare to get to council sometimes. I have to sit there and wait for forever, it seems like. So I think this is going to be a great addition to the community, because then we'll have basically 2 lanes in each direction, except between, I guess it's where Westlake Sammamish Y's with Bell Red Road up to 40th, but it'll be substantially better than what it is now, and so I look forward to that in the next few years. Yeah, there was a plan to put a rotunda there. The community was split 50-50. This was about 12 years ago. So there's design money in the budget, and as we go through the design process, we'll go through the options process. You can yes, Larry, Please.
for $1 a trip around. I really don't want to go. I got too many questions.
Yeah. So it actually have a path. So it'll extend the path that comes down to Marymore and 51st. Yeah. Well, exactly, and that's what I'm kind of led with, but maybe you got caught in the lead. But yeah, the idea is it'll expand to 5 lanes, so you have a turn lane and 2 lanes in each direction, and then over to the side, kind of on the Marymore side, you'll have so it's on the east side, you'll have a path that will basically be the same width as what you have next to Marymore down to 51st.
All right. So, thank you, David. Next question. How will we be able to drive through the Overlake area with increasing housing density with the same infrastructure, roads, causing backups at 24th and Bell Red are dangerous?
I think all of us want to jump on this one. So there are actual new roads being planned in the Overlake area, especially in the Overlake Village area. They're on the books, and as properties develop, the roads are being built, making connections. So it'll be more of a grid-style approach as opposed to what you see there now. The other thing is that the city lobbied the state legislature a few years ago, I don't remember exactly when, to build a flyover ramp off of 520 that would basically enable folks going to Microsoft to bypass all that mess at 24th and 148th, which we realize is a challenge. In fact, coming here tonight, I wanted to go over in that area. I'm like, I'm not going up that area because I'm going to avoid it. So I came a different way. Took me much longer, but that's okay. At least I was moving. That's two things. And then the third thing is that's where a light rail station's going. And so those apartments that'll go in there we're catering to, essentially, light rail. We're also working on, and this hasn't been said earlier, somebody mentioned public transportation or mobility earlier. The King County Metro, which is basically our bus provider in the area other than Sound Transit, is looking at a 2040 plan to bring buses into all the communities, and Redmond's one of those. And so as light rail comes in, one of the things that we're working on, and I serve on the Regional Transit Committee, one of the things we're advocating for is when you're, say, exchanging hours in one service, can we keep them in the area and then use them to feed that light rail service, essentially creating opportunities for folks more than just driving a car to a park and ride, for example. So those are the types of things we're working on doing in terms of getting folks to and from and around the area. So building roads, creating grids, creating the flyover, which reduces some of the stress on that intersection, as well as mobility-related transportation.
Mr. Carson.
So this one is kind of near and dear to my heart because I remember when we were talking about the original alignment for Sound Transit for the light rail, and initially it was going to come in off of 520 onto 24th and then elevated and go over 148th and then come down to grade and turn left onto 152nd. And I just thought it was the worst idea I'd ever heard because it was going to take out a bunch of businesses. And anyway, long story short, we found that it would actually serve more people because we were putting in a pedestrian bridge across 520 if we put it where it's now going to be located. So I shudder when I think of what it could have been, because it would have been just this tangle of light rail and traffic on 24th. And so fortunately, I think we dodged a big bullet there. Well, and the construction would have been just horrendous. But it also would have taken out a bunch of really prized businesses that we have along 152nd. So anyway, so that's, I think, the biggest thing. I think Mr. Marchison touched on a lot of the other things, but just because it's not a road doesn't mean it doesn't serve people. And I think that's what light rail and the bus service that will connect to the different stations around Redmond will be able to get people that last mile, either from home or to home, from light rail or other bus service.
Mr. Fields.
So great that those things are all coming. One of the things that I believe is in the plans is upgrade our analysis or modeling of that area, because the things that Councilmember Margison and Councilmember Carson described, I agree with. But I also think that there's a lot of unknowns and unpredictability in how people will use light rail. I live on Education Hill. I will want to use light rail. I most likely will not walk in December or ride my bike in the rain down to light rail. So I think that we need to think in terms of those kinds of movements or shifts in how we live our lives. And advanced modeling, I think, is a key to make sure that we plan correctly.
How many apartment buildings are being developed downtown in the last 5 years and currently under construction? Now, I don't know in terms of number of buildings, but about 3,200 units, about 3,000 units have been built in the last 5 to 10 years, and I think there's about 2,200 units that are under construction or close to being under construction. But we do have a website and can probably help you get more detailed information. But the plan was to have about 5,000 units in downtown to accommodate the growth, and we're on target to hit that number. I'm not expecting you guys to do math. Did someone want to add something? Okay. What has been the most impactful experience for you while serving on council? The audience wrote it, I didn't.
Well, I'll start with this one. I think it's, for me, it's been the preconception of who I could work with and who I wouldn't necessarily work with well. And it's funny when you end up on a 5-2 vote with someone you don't expect to be on the losing end of, with that person. So I think the best thing about it to me is that partisan politics really doesn't come into who you can work with on a regular basis on the council.
Mr. Murchison?
Thank you, and good question. So I go all the way back to my first year on council, and the most impactful moment was, it used to be called the one-night count. It's now called a point-in-time count, I think. There's some such thing. And the very first time I went out, and we got out of and we were driving around, in this case it was downtown Redmond, and we went down a hill and underneath a bridge and looked up, and I saw 2 people sleeping in a sleeping bag under a bridge in Redmond. That, to me, was the most impactful thing that has ever, literally, not just on council, but in life as well. I mean, obviously, birth of children is pretty important, don't get me wrong. But that was very impactful to me because I realized there are folks who are sleeping outside in my community, and I've seen them, literally. And I was shaking when I walked out of there. It was so impactful that I came back and said, we need to start talking about this. We need to get a handle on it. And, we have tried, and we are making great strides. In fact, somebody asked me the other day, what happened to all the people that used to be downtown that were, essentially homeless? And I said, we're finding places for them to live, or enabling them to get back on the right side and do good things in our community. Don't get me wrong, there's still folks who are out of shelter, and we've done great work on it. And so, to me, that was most impactful.
I'm just going to go down the line. Ms. Potier?
Thank you. I think the most impactful thing was the first time I got a letter from, I think it was a Redmond high school student. It was another South Asian Indian girl who wrote to me. And it occurred to me when I was growing up, I never saw anyone that looked like me in government. And for her to have picked me out and, ask for, an interview and to talk to me, that was like the most touching thing. And I just never imagined all the opportunities that I would get and just how people would feel seeing me up here. So I think it's just been an amazing experience.
I don't want to follow that one.
Councilmember Bernie?
Wow. I've really been fortunate to be in the position I'm in, to be council president at this moment, to be able to help guide where we go as a city, how we bring in all kinds of voices. And so there's a lot of different things that are really pretty amazing about the city and to being in this position. And because I cannot follow that, I'm going to go on a completely different take. When I was on the Parks and Trails Commission when we were first starting the planning for Downtown Park, and it felt like it was going to be forever till we got something done. And I always felt like there were stages of it where it was just not going to happen, and I didn't understand how this could possibly work. And slowly, from being on the Parks and Trails Commission to now being council president, last year we opened up that park. And I have to say, to see people using that park where once it was a little strip mall, and then it was a patch of brown grass, and then it was some stakes in the ground with people's ideas, and then now I go by it, and I see people using that stage. I saw a couple ballroom dancing on the stage the other night, and people were sitting there watching them. And to have that opportunity to see something like that happen in our city and create this a beautiful park where everyone can enjoy it and come out and spend time together and get to know each other, that's a really amazing thing that you get to do in this amazing city.
So I have small moments and one specific moment to share. One is I deeply appreciate each small conversation I've been able to have with each of my fellow council members, as well as the mayor and individual directors on staff. In my short time so far on council, each one of those learning moments has been very valuable for me. So collectively, that's a big thing. And second, I should say first, hands down, right along with the fire department. That was so amazing. Those guys are amazing, and women, those men and women are amazing. And there's sort of been my epiphany for the public safety department that's happened since about March, and my opportunity to experience what those folks do on the day-to-day to keep our city safe has been phenomenal. I have so much gratitude for them. So anyway, that's me. I'm a big fangirl for the fire department right now.
Should be on.
Great. So for me, I think the most impactful, and it's similar to Councilmember Anderson, being able to follow up with people who come and provide public testimony and follow up and find out specifically what their concerns were and actually help experience that and become a more informed and empathetic representative of the people in Redmond. So what impacts me, I think, is the public testimony, and specifically we had 4 high school students a couple of weeks ago that were imploring us, you know, almost very emotional, to consider looking at protecting their future by looking into plastic bans. And they provided some amazing testimony. They've done a lot of research. Be honest with you, thinking about it actually almost brings me to tears right now. They are begging this generation to make sure that they are not damaged or degraded in their opportunity to live the life. And knowing that as an elected representative that we have that influence and that power to do something about it, that was the most impactful moment for me.
Mr. Myers.
Thank you. I'm an English major. Impact is not a verb. So I will talk about the things that have most affected me or I've been most impressed with as a council member. And like a lot of you who are local to this area, we kind of feel a little estranged from downtown Redmond. And this area has provided a number of really good council members. Arnie Tomac and Margaret Doman are 2 great examples, a lot of good insight and connection. But the thing that has most impressed me is the amount of good work and innovative stuff that's being done outside of Redmond in our community, our nonprofits. For example, the Together Center, which is a 3-building human services campus near Bella Bottega. 30 years ago, it was a groundbreaking idea. It's still innovative, and it's very hard to duplicate, but they have been going there for 30 years, providing a lot of different services on one campus. Is very convenient to transit. We had venues for artists in the local area, which is privately founded, and gave individual artists an opportunity to show their work where they didn't have opportunities before. We also have a lot of citizen involvement in our own government. For example, and I see Larry back there, the Redmond Police Foundation is a group of citizens who go out and they raise money to provide stuff for our police officers that is outside of the budget. And you say, well, why is it outside of the budget? Well, sometimes things like if an officer needs counseling for PTSD, we have insurance, but it costs money out of pocket for them, so the Redmond Police Foundation pays that. We don't want to see police officers foregoing good counseling just because of the cost. And there are other things that they do. So you as a community are doing tremendous things that make this city every bit as rich as what we 7 do up here, and I want to thank you for that.
I think I'm going to correct you on 2 fronts. Impactful experience, impactful was an adjective, not a verb.
No. Well, no, it's not an adjective, it's an adverb.
But we provide thorough counseling for our public safety individuals, and we had counselors there today who had to clean up after a crime site this morning. So I don't want anyone going away thinking that our police and fire officers are not getting full medical treatment, full counseling. That there's probably better examples that could be used. Moving to the next question. Why does the budget by priorities result in funding of $42 million parks and rec programs, but not funding for police and fire, such that discussion Discussions ensue about levies. Are we adequately prioritizing?
I think this is specifically about the upcoming police and fire levy,
Well,
which is expiring, if I understand correctly.
it's not quite expiring, it's fading.
Fading.
So maybe I'll give a crack at the answer. So first of all, capital projects for the most part are one-time money. Police and fire are ongoing services. Property taxes, ongoing revenue. The $42 million in parks, really 22 million of it was land purchase to build roads. We built 164th through, 161st through, we put Bear Creek Parkway through. We completed mostly the street grid in downtown over the last 10 years. So we have put a lot of money into our roads in downtown. And so we were going to sell this $22 million piece of property in downtown. And I said, well, instead of selling it so it can be developed, you know, every great downtown has a downtown park. Went to the council, wasn't necessarily this year, was a prior council. They agreed. So the other 20 million went for constructing of parks. I want to say a large portion of it was paid by impact fees. So all those buildings that built paid for that downtown park. Again, one-time money, couldn't pay for police and fire. General fund only paid for 15% of it. So a very small portion considering the state grants, the impact fees, and other things. The police and fire levy was passed in 2007, and it was passed at 25 cents per thousand, and it was to fund, I want to say, about 9 police officers and 9 firefighters, and allowed us to open up Station 17 on the north end of Education Hill. The way the property tax works in the state is kind of weird, so I won't try to explain it, but basically the purchasing power fades over time. And at that time, we figured it would last about 8 years to 2015. Well, we've been able to stretch it out till about 2021, 2022 before that fading starts cutting in. We're not going to lose all those firefighters in one swoop. It's just we're going to have to look at our priorities. It's really a function of the state tax system, which doesn't fund inflation. If it just let us keep up with inflation, we wouldn't be coming back to the voters. But it's a more complicated thing than that. Mr. Murchison.
And I'll be mindful of the time as well, but you know, every time we go into budgeting, those are the kinds of conversations we have. What's our priority? And I would say if you look at anybody who works and knows or is involved in a work situation, Mr. Fields would know this, the majority of your expense is people, you know, whether it's salary and benefits or whatnot. And so we have a fully staffed police and fire department, and that costs us ongoing money. And so those are the types of conversations we say, okay, that's funded, let's move on, those sorts of things. And then when it comes to the one-time dollars, that's where we have some of our best arguments in terms of who wants to put this as a top priority. And a lot of work is done, quite frankly, thanklessly, by citizens that get involved in the budgeting by priorities process. We have a citizens committee that meets and gives feedback to staff as to where they think money should go. And they do have an input on the capital budget, which is essentially those one-time dollars. And we take money out of our general fund. We've done this for a number of years to dedicate it to capital improvements. Because if you have a city full of people, but you don't have anything for them to do, that becomes a problem. And we looked at when I was on council, when this downtown park came up, I thought, this is a great idea. And it's actually turned out better than I expected. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, and one quick note about when you use one-time dollars for capital projects, you still have to maintain them. So there's a residual that you have to worry about, that maintenance, and that takes labor. And so even if you're doing one-time projects, you still have to figure out how to maintain them going forward. And so if you build too many things, you end up with having to add staff to be able to maintain them.
Well, next one, I'm curious, Council. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fields.
I thought you were passing. I'm not going to discuss what did happen or whether they were the right priorities, but I would just add this, that the better our relationship is with the residents, and the better we actually involve you in identifying priorities on an ongoing basis, then by the time that we do get to that exercise called budgeting, we have a pretty good idea of how people feel how their tax money should be used. So I think that one of the things that would be, again, going back to question number one, with the neighborhood association, to get better input from you on a daily basis almost will help the city prepare for that period of time where we actually do that exercise called budgeting.
Thank you. Just taking care. Does the city of Redmond use the pesticide Roundup currently? If so, can residents get a map of areas where it is sprayed? It is posted in areas sprayed, and if so, can we look for alternatives to get away from using it? I don't know if I have a map, but we use it sparingly. We use it targetedly. The only place that I am aware of it right now is a part of the, what's the name of the Keller Farm area, which is past Safeway down 520, and we spot use it. If you do so want such a map, we don't use it very often, but you can email me at mayor@redmond.gov, and we'll see what I don't know if we can provide a map or more descriptions of where we use it, but very sparingly, because our water is underneath it. What's going on in the corner? So you got two questions. Which one's the more interesting one? Okay, I'll go with what's going on the corner of Willows and 124th. I thought this area was, quote unquote, protected from development. When something is protected, how long does that protection last? Mr. Carson.
So is this would be on the south?
I think
west
this would
side.
be the Proctor
Willows.
So
okay.
on the
Yeah.
west
Southwest side. Southwest corner.
The east side is farming land, and so that's
Right.
always farming land. The west side was business park.
Yeah. That's there is a development that is has been approved to go in there on the corner of Willows and 124th at the very edge of Redmond. I don't think it was ever protected. It's always been a business park
zoning.
Zoning. So.
Mr. Myers.
Thank you. Actually, what's going on is there's going to be some of the first affordable townhouse construction to be built recently in the city of Redmond. The area is going to consist of about, I think, 170 townhouses between 1,400 and 1,800 square feet, plus a mid-rise apartment building, commercial, a lot of open space and parks. Forever it has been zoned as business park, and the topography just didn't work. So finally we said, well, why don't we make some of these vacant lands that we have work for us in some fashion? Now I have to tell you, and I think probably some of you in the same position I am, I'm living in a 2,300 square foot home on a third of an acre with my wife and me, an empty nest, but it is because the mortgage is paid, it's the cheapest place I can live. On the other hand, if I were to go out and sell it for an inflated price, I'd still have to take a mortgage out to move into a smaller place here in Redmond because we're not building affordable housing. So I'm looking at that as one of the first real projects to help people my age and people who are in the millennial age to find affordable housing that they can actually purchase.
All right, this is the last question. It's a quick one. I'm going to answer it. When will the trail from Marymore Park be connected to Idlewood Park? Half the answer is the trail from Marymore Park to Idlewood's the question, if I said it wrong. But so the trail from 51st, or along Westlake Sammamish from 51st, will go all the way down to where the roundabout is, where Bell Red splits in Westlake Sammamish. That's part of the road that David talked about earlier. There is no funding for a trail from that point to Idlewood Park at this time, and I don't believe it's in our capital plans anywhere at this time. But if that's important to you, you can email the council. Next year's a budget year, and that's when that's when we want to hear your priorities. Thank you for coming out tonight. I tried to get through a lot of this, and like I said, you can lobby your council members the rest of the year. evening, year, whatever. Thank you very much. Thank you, council.